Welcome back to the Matt and Eric Talk Twins podcast. We're coming at you here off a little bit of a 2 week break. Apologies for the delay, but that of course means we are going to have a lot to talk about. So I figured why not just get right in. We'll get started. Matt, how are we feeling about the Twins right now?
Uh, it cannot be more different from the last time we talked. We were kind of fresh off the heels of that 8-1 stretch. We felt like the Twins weren't the best team in baseball, but probably we're going to hang around, maybe be in the wild card hunt for the majority of the season. And they've gone, I think, 13. They've lost 13 of their last 16 games. So it's tough to watch.
Yeah, I think the frustrating part for me is that we've actually been competitive in more games than I would have expected, which makes it tougher to see so many of these losses pile up. But it's also unsurprising. The ways we've been losing these games are exactly what we laid out, and we're still figuring about back in the preseason, in the off season, my bad. And now we have our newest roadblock in the season. We're coming at you Sunday night about 5 hours after Joe Ryan left with elbow soreness that was undisclosed and not specified further. Um, Level with me, Matt. Is there any world that this elbow soreness does not lead to Tommy John?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen pitchers before, pull themselves from starts, complain their elbows barking up, and then they end up being fine. That's pretty unlikely, especially in games where the guy is fully warmed up, he's pitching, and then he pulls himself out. Usually, we see the guys who catch it early enough. It's like in warm-ups, they get scratched or between starts. And so for Joe Ryan to throw a pitch and then signal to the dugout they need to come out, not a good sign.
The one thing that I'm trying to hold on to for a little bit of hope here is Joe Ryan has been here and done this before. I want to say, was 2024 when he tried pitching through back injuries for most of the second half and ended up just becoming an incredibly ineffective pitcher. I really think that he's learned a lot from that in terms of not trying to push himself just to be available when he's not 100%. We saw it at the start of spring training this year when he left one of his starts with general back discomfort, and that ended up not being a huge deal. He was able to get back, still throw in spring training, and start opening day on track because I think largely he was proactive enough to take him out of a situation where his body just didn't feel right. So if I'm hoping on anything right now, it's that maybe he just got out in front of it once again and we can throw some ice on it for a few weeks.
Yeah, but it's a very different thing. Like, you're not going to tear a back muscle. Like, it's the largest muscles in your body. It's like more so a strain, something that you need to just take time off, versus like your elbow ligaments are a very small thing that can snap in an instant, and they also don't heal on their own. So like once they get damaged, they're just damaged until you get surgery. And so it's hard to be like, oh, he's fine, we'll ice it up, because if he did injure it in the way that we think, there's really only one solution, and it leads to Joe Ryan missing the rest of the year.
Yeah, and if we want to go down that path, I'm not trying to get too doomy and gloomy, but it's hard to not think about a lot of the parallels to the conversations we had about Pablo when he ended up needing Tommy John surgery at the start of spring training. Obviously, this, I guess, to me comes a little bit differently just because like we'd been getting into the season. Clearly, we had built a plan more around trying to be competitive in 2026, and that revolved around Joe Ryan. But questions have to come again now about what do the Twins do here? If Joe Ryan does have Tommy John surgery, you're probably not seeing him back till May, June, even July next year, which means he's really poising himself to both A, be an untradeable asset this offseason, but B, come back, still look great for the second half of 2027, and still price himself out of the Twins' price range for free agents.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a great situation. And we also talked about this over the offseason, right? When we were talking about, do they trade Pablo? Do they trade Joe Ryan? Do we see them cash in on that value? Because, I mean, the point that I made in the offseason was these guys are one pitch away from going from massive trade value to absolutely no value at all. We saw Pablo's elbow give out to the point where his contract is now underwater. We could potentially see a similar thing here with Joe Ryan. I mean, depending on the type of surgery he requires, Tommy John versus primary repair, he might be out until July or August of next year. In which case, it gets a little questionable whether you even tender him a contract for next season. I think you still do, and just hope that he comes back. But I mean, it's tough, and it's tough for us too. Day of to speculate and see what it would look like if he did fully blow out his elbow, because obviously we won't know probably until tomorrow afternoon with the off day. But yeah, not looking good.
For those of you that are already tired of this injury talk, don't worry, so are we. But unfortunately, here we're actually just getting started with our roundup of Twins injuries just in the past week or two alone. Emmanuel Rodriguez has gone on the injured list. Walker Jenkins has gone on the injured list. Alan Roden has also hit the injured list with a torn labrum. And as Matt mentioned pre podcast, Kalen Culpepper also just got hit with a pitch and is already slated to miss the next few days. So, do you want to dive into any of these? I mean, where do we start with this overload of injuries?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing here is that it's a lot of left-handed hitting outfielders who are now injured. All three of our prize prospects at AAA are now hurt. I will say Emmanuel Rodriguez, it's not as bad as we initially thought. He's not yet on the minor league injured list. It sounds like he is going to take some swings on the field tomorrow. He's potentially going to try to play in this week's series. So we might have dodged a bullet. But with him, it's a hand and wrist injury, which is what he's struggled with over the last couple of years. So that's concerning. Walker Jenkins got injured today, colliding with the center field fence, immediately grabbed at his shoulder and elbow. I don't think we've gotten official word on what the injury is, but definitely didn't look good. And then, yeah, as you said, Kalen Culpepper, just a little bit of a stinger. He got hit in his left shoulder while he was hitting. It's a little, I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing where he was turning to swing and got hit, and didn't necessarily like turn his back to the pitch. So just kind of an uncomfortable and strange spot to get hit with a ball. But I would imagine he'll be fine. And then the big one, the injury that's going to keep a guy out for a while, is Alan Roden tearing the labrum in his shoulder, and he's going to be out for at least the next month. There's still the chance that he's going to require surgery on that shoulder, and obviously at which point he'd be out for a much longer time. So, I mean, as much as we are frustrated with Matt Wallner to start the year, and we've gotten pretty minimal production out of our right field group, the abundance of options that we had to start the season are pretty quickly vanished.
Yeah, I think that is going to be the most intriguing thing for me to watch over the next few weeks because I didn't really notice Matt Wallner getting benched. It's something that I don't believe the Twins ever really directly acknowledged. I don't know if they would have even ever called it Matt Wallner getting benched, but when I turned on a Twins game and I saw a right-handed pitcher on the mound and I did not see Matt Wallner in the lineup, I knew something was amiss. In short, he just has to play through it now because as Matt mentioned, we really don't have any backup options behind him anymore, which is obviously going to be a frustrating spot to be in. But it's also something that I would like to see him play through because I think he's an established enough veteran at this point that he's earned the right to just kind of slide down the lineup, try adjust and figure it out on the fly. Obviously, Luke Keisha is another guy who's been struggling really hard to start the year, and he has gotten more of a runway to keep playing in everyday second base, and he's been getting the treatment of bumping down the lineup but continuing to play every day and trying to play through it and figure it out. Some of that is again just the positional versatility where the Twins up until the last week or so really had a lot more options to replace Matt Wallner out in right field, but I if this means that the Twins do have to just let Matt Wallner play through his struggles and figure it out, I do not mind that.
Yeah, I mean, also there's a physical component to Matt Wallner's struggles. If you remember a few weeks ago, he got hit by a pitch in the ribs. I'm sure it left a bruise, and it's pretty significantly limited his mobility. He just looks like he's, fighting through it a little bit, and the Twins have acknowledged that at times. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he still has some lingering effects from that. But yeah, I mean, on the season, he's a 37% strikeout rate, which is extremely high and pretty much unplayable. He's also not walking at nearly the clip we would expect for a real three true outcomes slugging corner outfielder. And he's also been pretty brutal in the field, being worth about -3 runs so far. In total, in 28 games played, he's been worth negative half of a win above replacements. He's been, one of the big contributing factors to this team being pretty disappointing so far. Yeah, and like you said, he's gonna have to keep playing through it. He's also, a 28-year-old player who has 1,000 plate appearances in the big leagues. It's, I mean, he has an option left, but if you're sending him down at this point, it's a really bad sign for the player. He's a guy that you are just going to have to ride with and hope that he bounces back. Because honestly, I mean, at least in the short term, we don't have options to replace him. In the long term, you do, but before you replace him, you want to make sure that anything that he has left to give, you've squeezed out of him. You've given him those opportunities. So, I mean, there's not a path forward for him besides just rolling him out there a couple times a week and seeing what he can do.
Yeah, I think that can get really frustrating as a fan just because we are not doing well and he is very much contributing to the lack of success on this team. The one thing that I've been drawing a lot of parallels to recently was the Yankees' decision. I believe they decided this yesterday to not call up Anthony Volpe upon his finish of his rehab assignment. He was playing in the minor leagues, hitting well, like hitting fine. He was healthy, and they just decided we don't want you on the team right now. We don't think you're providing any contributions to winning baseball. And I think that's just the fundamental difference between where these two teams are at right now. The Yankees are at a point where they need to make those types of decisions and try to squeeze every little juice out of this roster. The Twins are in a similar situation in terms of trying to squeeze every little drop of juice of talent out of the roster, but I'll be in a very different scenario where they can afford to just weather these bad storms by the players. That's why, like Matt said, you kind of just have to let Matt Wallner do his thing.
Yeah, I will say Volpe is a pretty different situation from Wallner because Volpe's never hit in the big leagues. He was a top prospect coming up, and he's gotten to some power, but he had an 83 WRC plus his rookie year, 87 in 2024, and 83 last season. And so we have 3 years, his entire big league sample. Was that about 1,700 plate appearances of him being 15 to 20% below average hitter. Matt Wallner, on the other hand, has been, even last year in a down year, a well above average hitter. So going back to 2022 and only an 18 game sample size, 103 WRC plus, then 141 in 2023, 154 in 2024, and 114 last year. So I think there's a lot more reasons to believe in Wallner, at least in the box. But yeah, I mean, for both guys, it's a tough situation.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I was drawing a lot of the parallels. Even though Volpe has never hit good at the major league level, he's still been a 3.3, 3.5, and 1.6 WAR player over his first 3 seasons in New York, just because the defense was so special. Obviously, I think if you ask some New York fans, they would tell you that it just has to be a lie. And I think that's a whole other question to get into about the value of defensive WAR and all that. But at the end of the day, he had shown clear talent in the major leagues, which I think is why it made such big waves that he was getting functionally demoted. And that's where I really draw the similarities to Matt Wallner, where, again, bigger stage, bigger fish to fry for the Yankees. But I think that these guys held a similar amount of pedigree relative to their team coming up through the minor leagues. And I think that they were counted on to be a similarly like core piece of the roster over their first few years of their careers. So I guess that was just the immediate kind of connection that I made.
Talking about another guy who is expected to be a core piece of this Twins roster, we have Royce Lewis. Eric and I have butted heads on Royce Lewis's outlook a couple of times, and he just still continues to be underwhelming. In 2022 and 2023, he obviously played at a star level. However, that was only a 70 game sample size. 2024 got off to a hot start, fell off in the second half, finished with a 106 WRC plus, and it's only gotten worse from there. He played 106 games last year with an 85 WRC plus, and this year, through his first 21 games, he's down to a 78 WRC plus. He's walking more. It's come with strikeouts. His BABIP's a little bit lower. He's not slugging the ball like we had hoped he would. And his defense has really fallen off a cliff to the point where he's been a negative contributor so far this season. And, I think we have to start talking about Royce Lewis, not even from the perspective of what do we need to do to get this guy rolling? Maybe do they trade him? Does another team see promise in him? And we're almost getting to the point where, Royce Lewis could be a non-tender candidate. Royce Lewis could be a really cheap trade option where we get very minimal value back for him. Because he's going to cross over 4 years of service time this year. So that means going into the offseason, Twins will only control him for 2 more seasons. He will have been an unproductive player, assuming he continues to play at his current rate, for 2.5 years. I don't think it's unreasonable to say, Royce Lewis could be a pretty valueless player on this roster by the time we get to the offseason.
Yeah, the disappointing part here is that he started the season really hot for what was it, maybe 2.5 weeks before he got hurt, and just has not looked like the same player at all coming back. It's not really surprising. We've talked at length about how I believe he has mentality issues, honestly, playing the game, preparing for the game, everything about his approach to hitting has not particularly wowed us, and it's been kind of a point of consternation, and it's been kind of an ornery subject for Royce Lewis for a while now. And so it's not surprising coming off a major injury, completely disrupting your flow, that you aren't able to come back and be at the same level you were before the injury. But good players just don't run into those issues. They work through them. At this point, you can't just call it a post injury slump. This is just what Royce Lewis has looked like. And I'm right there with you, where if he can't change anything this season to show any sort of promise, I don't think even trade value left in him.
Yeah, and I guess I don't even necessarily put too much stock into this season. I mean, it's only been 21 games, and like you said, it was interrupted by that injury. But I mean, you just go back over his last 200 games, and he hasn't been a good player. And with multiple ACL tears on top of quads and obliques and all kinds of lower body injuries, I think it's fair to question whether he's you know, physically capable of doing the same things that he did early in his career. I mean, we saw Royce Lewis as a prospect was extremely explosive athlete. He was fast. He was agile. Like, he did everything that you could do on a baseball field. And he had some injuries. He lost a lot of the speed component. He wasn't able to, keep up his athleticism in the field. He moved off of shortstop to third. He's no longer an outfield option. And he started to slug the ball more, which made him a really impactful bat. But now I mean, it sucks to say, but I think the lower body injuries might just be to the point where he doesn't have game changing power. He also doesn't run. He also isn't a great fielder. And it's just like, what is this guy doing well at this point? And it's not clear that it's anything.
Yeah, it certainly makes it easier to accept and acknowledge that he's fallen off compared to a guy like Brooks Lee, who I think is in a very similar spot in terms of being on the chopping block with the Twins, where he just never really produced. You could say that he was maybe just overdrafted a little bit. Some of the tools weren't as they were hyped up to be, and he was rushed through the minor leagues a little bit. But it's easier to look at a guy like Royce Lewis and at least kind of accept from a fan side that he gave it his all. He once was a good player, and you can understand how we got to this point. I doesn't really make it any easier to stomach and swallow as a fan, but I think it's at least one where I would be ready to move on from him quicker than I would Brooks Lee, honestly, because I think we're quickly approaching the point where we are figuring out how do we arbitrage this roster, where do we really need to upgrade, and what is really holding us back from competing.
Yeah, I'll also say, Brooks Lee's a couple years younger than Royce Lewis. He's under team control for I think 2 or 3 more seasons than Brooks or than Royce Lewis. He also has positional flexibility, being able to play 3 different infield spots. So even as a potential backup on a good team, he has a lot more value than Royce Lewis does. So I would agree. I would definitely be a lot more willing to move on from Royce Lewis, especially if this team, goes down the path that I think we all see coming, where they potentially are in rebuild mode by the deadline in this offseason. And it would just make more sense to hold on to the guy that you have controlled for 4 or 5 more years versus two. I'll
Yeah.
also say Brooks Lee fell in the draft in large part because of injuries. He had some knee concerns, but the big concern was his lower back. He had a lot of injuries there in college. We saw that even coming up through the minors. If you remember in spring training in, what was it, 2023, 2024, whatever his debut season, he looked like he was on the cusp of making the Twins opening day roster. And then he went down with a back injury at the end of camp. He missed a few weeks on the minor league side before coming back. uh, you know, it's definitely possible that a lot of the same concerns we have with Lewis and him just not being as explosive or capable as an athlete are, the same here for Lee, and that he just hasn't fully recovered from some of those injuries.
I think the big thing that we're going to come down to when we're looking at all of these fringe roster guys, which at this point is what you have to consider Lewis, you have to consider Lee on top of all the outfield guys we've already been talking about, is also just how our farm system is stacked right now. Where, I mean, like you said, Brooks Lee could slide over and play an everyday third base. I honestly think I would like that more than Royce Lewis at third base right now. But even if Kalen Culpepper is up this year and does take Brooks Lee's job, he's our everyday starting shortstop. We still have more down in the farm system. Obviously, Merrick Houston is a guy that we've been big on who can move quickly. And with a guy like him who was really drafted to be a glove first plus defender at shortstop, you're definitely not moving him. So I think that it's just very quickly going to become a math issue where the Twins don't necessarily need to move on from Brooks Lee, and that maybe puts him in a spot a year or two from now, similar to where we have felt Trevor Larnach is this year, where you don't have to move on from him, but there's also plenty of opportunity to. So I really don't hold out a lot of high hopes for anybody left in our infield other than Luke Keeschel to be around and be a piece in a year or two even.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can say that about pretty much the entire position player side for the Twins. I mean, just looking at their team, a lot of the reasons for optimism with this offense are guys who are not controlled long term. The aforementioned Trevor Larnach is number 2 on our roster in WAR. He's put up a 142 WRC plus. He's looked better than I think anyone thought he would in the field. He's hit well. He's been a solid player, but again, he's only controlled for this year and next, and we weren't even sure he was worthy of an arbitration contract. And so, minimal value there long term. Ryan Jeffers, an impending free agent, is our third highest WAR player. He's, obviously a free agent. He doesn't have a contract after the season. Exceptionally unlikely that he's going to return. And then beyond that, I mean, you have Austin Martin, who's gotten off to a hot start, but definitely don't think he's an everyday player. And then it falls off quickly to the Tristan Grays and Brooks Lees and even Ryan Kreidler rounding out our top 7. And he played 5 games. So it's an uninspiring group. The one shining star for this offense is Ben Byron Buxton, who's hit 10 home runs in the last, I think, 19 games. He's been
Sounds about right to
amazing.
me.
Yeah, he's been amazing. He's been worth 1.2 WAR. He plays every day in center field. But also, if this team does tear down, he's definitely a guy that they're going to look to offload because he's a 32-year-old center fielder, and he probably has no desire to stick around through a rebuild.
I'm just going to tease it now because I'm sure we're going to be talking about this an awful lot in the upcoming months. If Byron Buxton ends up being dealt at the trade deadline, do we assume he's the best player to be moved?
Probably the most valuable player, just because we don't see a lot of guys who have 2.5 years of controlled dealt, especially star position players. But yeah, I could definitely see that.
I think the big thing for the Twins to think about, that's why I'm already bringing it up, because every year there's at least one team that starts selling early because they know that they're going to be bad. And a lot of the guys that they are selling are fringe pieces anyway, where it's like, I don't really know how much this guy is going to boost my team at the trade deadline, but if I can get him for like 3 quarters of the season, that's a totally different outlook. And I think that's where, especially for a guy like Trevor Larnach, we're going to fall into a spot where the Twins have to be considering, even by the end of May, if he still has anything even north of an 800 OPS, that they should be trying to move him, because you look at the guys that they have that they need to offload, and a lot of them are guys that we didn't really know if they'd even be able to trade, because we didn't expect them to be this good. And if they are, I think you have to move fast before the mirage fades.
Yeah, I mean, this Twins team, especially if Joe Ryan is now hurt and potentially out for the year, I think the Sharks are going to start circling quickly. And you just look around the league at a lot of teams who are, trying to contend, and they have some pretty weak corner outfield groups. I mean, right now, just looking at Fangraphs rest of season projections, the Atlanta Braves are running away with the NL East. They look like a great team, and they have the 28th ranked rest of season WAR for left fielders, with Mike Yastrzemski getting the majority of plate appearances there. Other teams like the Diamondbacks, Guardians, Rays to an extent, Reds, Royals, Pirates, even. There's a lot of teams who could use some left field reinforcement, even if it's just in a strong side platoon. And I would expect that, some of those teams might come calling, especially if they think the Twins are ready to give up on the season. And I mean, if Joe Ryan goes down, they should be ready to give up on the season, because they were a fringe contender to begin with. They're off to a bad start. They're playing poorly, and their two best pitchers are now hurt.
Yeah, we kind of forgot to go over this earlier, but since we're back to Joe Ryan, I also want to sit here and try and figure out, where do we go with this pitching staff now? Because before he got hurt, we'd been talking for a while about the idea of Sim versus Connor Prelip, and once McAble comes back, one of them's got to go. And if Connor Prelip has been looking as good as he has these first two starts, it would be incredibly difficult to look him in the eye, send him back down when Simeon is pretty much just incapable of putting up a competitive start at this point. But now we're not only at a point where we don't need to worry about that, but we're probably at least 2 weeks away from a McAble return, at least 2 weeks away from a David Festa return, probably even longer for him. The Twins need another starter in the rotation right now, and I don't know that there's a very obvious answer out there for them.
Yeah, I think they really have two routes to go. So they could bring up Zebby Matthews, have him just be, traditional starter, and see what he can do. He has gotten off to a pretty brutal start in AAA. He has an ERA over 5. The velocity's still down. He had a good start recently, but still like an uninspiring start to the season for him. I could see them continuing to give him some more time down there. I could see the Twins bringing up, like a Kendry Rojas to be their fifth starter, or like pseudo fifth starter. He's really only stretched out to go maybe 3 innings at a time. You could stack him with Andrew Morris or John Klein and kind of just do a bullpen game every fifth day, get a lot of those prospects in there. But yeah, it's not great, and it's really what we've talked about a lot this spring, saying that the Twins, especially post Pablo injury, have pretty limited depth in the starting rotation, and now with a couple more injuries, it's getting gross quick.
Yeah, you highlight well the lack of options behind Zebby Matthews if the Twins want to go that route. I'm just really strongly against promoting a guy who didn't do it successfully really last year at the major league level, and has not even been succeeding at the AAA level this year, and clearly has a lot of things he still needs to work through and figure out. I know a few episodes ago we were just arguing about the whole kind of mental toll about going up and down, and having such an uncertain footing in the major leagues. And I think adding that on top of everything that Zebi is already trying to work through right now would just be an unmitigated disaster for him, his development, and his season. So while you really are scuffling for an answer, I think the Twins should be trying to figure out anything they can besides bringing up Zebi Matthews.
Yeah, and I'll also say, I mean, even from the start of the season, despite his issues last year and being effective, Zebi Matthews is one of the Twins' 13 best pitchers. Like, he deserves to be on this roster. And the reason that he's been down in AAA is to, develop, try to become a more reliable starting pitcher, and get on track. And so, if you've already taken that arm away from the major league team for the first month of the season, so you could try to get him on track and develop him as a starter, there's no sense in now changing that plan when he's not ready just because you've had injuries in the big leagues. You've always had a need at the big league level, and you've chosen to keep Zebi in the minors. You just got to roll with it at this point.
Yeah, I mean, short of a miracle being worked on Joe Ryan's elbow, I think we are in full-fledged tank mode already a month into the season, month and a half into the season. So
And
I
that's and
am
that's
all
so disappointing too. After this kind of hot start, I like the last podcast I was on with you, I was saying this team is going to be competitive throughout most of the season. And gosh, what a difference 2 weeks makes.
So I guess we are maybe throwing in the towel slightly prematurely, just in the sense that like we're 15-20. We talked at the start of the season about just playing 500 ball and getting hot for a week or two. We are once again at a point where we're a hot week away from being a 500 team, which would mean a lot more to the Twins and a lot of other franchises. And so it is tough to look at this record and clearly there's a lot of frustration with how we've gotten there, but as I mentioned earlier, I think the fact that there is frustration with how we've gotten here shows that there's also been sparks of life out of this team weekly at this point. Even I would say it isn't more than every 2 or 3 games that I watch a Twins game and I'm like, wow, these guys like have the framework of something being put together here. They just completely lack the consistency, especially in the bullpen. But maybe we are still being a little too tough on a team that is at the same point they were after 35 games in 2025. And while it didn't end well, obviously we saw the run they got on and how great the Twins looked for the first third of the 2025 season. Like we aren't at a point where we're totally out of the race just because we're a sub 500 team.
Okay, but at the same point last year, the Twins were in game 2 of a 13-game winning streak, and they went on that 13-game winning streak and then still were a 70-win team. So like things went as great as they possibly could in May, and the team still fell apart and was a disaster by the end of the year. And yeah, I agree with you that theoretically they're a hot week away from being right back into the thick of wild card contention in the AL, especially given how bad the American League as a whole has played. But they're also a bad week away from being 10 games below 500 with an injured roster, and we have absolutely no faith whatsoever. So I guess my thought is this next week of games for the Twins is really going to make or break the season. And if things go poorly, I mean, we're going to be talking trades way sooner than we ever would have hoped, and not for a good reason.
I think what this next week of baseball is really going to tell us, especially as we get the news on Joe Ryan and his injury status, is how serious the Twins are about being all in on 2026 because we're looking at this from the pessimistic, depressed fan point of view, which we have every right to be because the Twins have been treating this team and their fans like crap for the past 2 years. But at the end of the day, they said they want to be competitive this season and they've been trying to do things that back that up, albeit on a very hamstringed budget still. They've been showing signs of, hey, we're going to get aggressive in promoting Connor Prelip and Kendry Rojas. We're going to be getting aggressive trying to keep the season afloat. So whether the Twins win or lose, I think the actions they take in getting guys up and down and playing every day is going to say a lot more about where our next few months are headed than the actual results on the field.
Okay, but also if they were so win now and they really cared about this season, they would have just signed a bunch of relievers this offseason. They would have spent $20 million on the bullpen. They wouldn't have come into the season with Justin Topa as arguably their highest leverage arm. They wouldn't have to rely on Andrew Morris and Kendry Rojas being lights out relievers from the jump. They would have just signed, Sir Anthony Dominguez and Sean Armstrong and whoever, like not even high wattage arms. They would have just brought in guys who are capable setup men, and they would be. I mean, they probably would have won 2 or 3 more games if they had a league average bullpen at this point. We've seen this team blow so many more leads than even an average bullpen. And so to say, like, oh, this year's important for us, and then not address the most efficient part of the roster at all for the entire offseason, and then be surprised when that is the leading factor in this team being really bad. I mean, it can be that the actions aren't matching their words just because they don't understand the actions. Like, it could be ignorance and incompetence, but really anyone with a brain should have been able to see this and go, this is not going to work. And you're just saying things to say things, like you say you want to be good, but that's more hoping than actually striving. Like, you're not doing anything to do that.
To me, this feels a lot more like the divorced co-parenting setup where you have two sides. In this case, it is ownership and the Twins front office, which at this point is just Jeremy Zoll, who are co-raising this baby. They are equal parts committed to this team. I mean, obviously, Jeremy Zoll is employed by them, but in terms of how it is built and deployed, he's really, I'd say, 50-50 there with ownership. And it's like a really bad case of co-parenting where both parents are coming together and they're saying all the right things in mediation where it's like, yep, we want to have a healthy relationship. We're going to do what's best for this child. We want to see them succeed and we're willing to sacrifice above all else. And then only one side of them holds up the deal. Maybe it's, Jeremy Zoll is trying his absolute hardest to put out the best team on the field on any given day for this Twins team, and the front, not the front office, and ownership is also saying, yep, we want to be competitive. Great job, Jeremy. We love what you're doing, but not actually giving him any of the support he needs on their end to be good. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how successful we are at what we do as much as what we are trying to do. And I think that's where I'm really locked in is the Twins have been pretty delusional in telling themselves they think they can be good this season and that they're going to figure it out with the team they have. So every call up, every send down, every decision is more insight into how delusional they still are and how much of that train they're still riding.
Yeah, I mean, this bullpen has been a disaster. They're 28th in baseball in ERA. They're 29th in WHIP. They're 29th in strikeout rate. They're 30th in hits per nine. I mean, they're horrendous. Like, you could drop the best year of John Duran into this bullpen, and it probably doesn't even get them back to average. And so even if you're hoping that Andrew Morris or Kendry Rojas or whoever, John Klein, can suddenly snap their fingers and turn into a flame-throwing shutdown reliever, A, very unlikely to happen. B, even if it does happen, their bullpen plan working is maybe getting back to being average. And I mean, for a team that also has been successful with the starting pitching, but now is potentially facing a long-term outage from Joe Ryan, they're still horrendous defensively. They've played more around average offensively. It's hard to look at this team and construe it as a contender, even looking at it through the best lens. Even if they solve their biggest deficiency, they still have problems elsewhere on the roster that make me think this isn't a team that's going to make noise in the playoffs, and it's unlikely that they even become a playoff team.
No, I'm 100% on the same page, and that's where I think a lot of both our takes have been coming from to start the day. I try to stay a little more balanced and even keeled when we're really getting into the nitty gritty of this, because as much as we would like to see the Twins just fully commit to the teardown and be bad and let it happen, it's clear that they're resisting that idea. So it's fun to look at this as from a fan standpoint, what we would like to do, but I do think it's still more productive to try to stay in touch and in tune with what our front office is doing, even if it's nonsensical.
Yeah, and as one like closing note on this, I will say their resistance to a teardown has led to the complete degradation of our two most valuable trade assets, their values. Like Joe Ryan and Pablo Lopez, if this Joe Ryan injury is as bad as we think it is, he's now worth minimal value on the trade market. Pablo Lopez is worth negative trade value currently. I mean, you can't predict injuries. It's hard to say. Like nobody knew that this was going to happen, but it was within the realm of possibilities. And to go into a season with the misguided belief that you could win with a very dysfunctional roster and then lose out on massive trade value on two pieces that you knew weren't going to be around long term anyways, with the hopes of just winning this year, always felt like a mistake. It always felt like kind of a weird play for this team, and it's it looks like it's going to set them back long term, and that's really frustrating.
I am going to also jump in here with my quite literal closing remarks on the statement, mainly because I don't remember if I've ever laid down on the podcast this take, but it's something I've been talking about and tracking for a while now with Matt. At the start of the season, I took one look at this bullpen and the way they're being deployed, and I'm like, you know what? My not so bold take for the Twins this year is I think we see at least five pitchers get to five saves for the team this season. We, through 15 wins now, have picked up 6 saves as a team. Justin Topa is the only one to record multiple, so shout out to Justin Topa. Our 5 savees so far are Topa, Cody Funderburk, Eric Orzi, Cole Sands, and Cody Lawyerson. So that makes it tough because I doubt we see Cody Lawyerson make a return to this bullpen even when he does get healthy. I think it would take a string of injuries similar to what we're seeing now, with Cole Sands also being out, for him to get back into the bullpen. But that still gives us 4 different Twins that have recorded at least one save, and we're not even a quarter of the way into the season. So we're not entirely off track yet.
Okay, I will say I think Cody Lawyerson does make a return to this bullpen. We currently have the near 40-year-old Luis Garcia pitching for us, and he threw the 8th inning of a one-run game this week. And Cody Lawyerson had a 31% strikeout rate for the Twins early in the year. And as you mentioned, got a save, and it was a 2-inning save in which he got like 3 punch outs. So, I mean, when you're working with this bad of a bullpen, one good outing is all you need to buy another opportunity.
That is a very spot on and very bleak look at our bullpen, and I would like to put that talk behind us for one. So, when I sat down to start recording with Matt, we were figuring out what we're going to talk about today, and by the time we figured out everything we want to cover, I looked at him and I'm like, man, do we have at least like one good thing to say about the Twins right now? And outside of Byron Buxton, who has been killing it, it has been genuinely exciting to see Connor Prelip through, albeit just 2 starts to this season. He's been very serviceable. He has, I mean, already through 2 starts been arguably our third best starting pitcher this year. 3 starts.
3 starts, 14 innings.
Oh yeah. I was missing his first one because. So, anyways, through 3 starts, I think you can already count him in as one of the most valuable members of our rotation at this point. He is clearly outdueling Simeon Woods Richardson on a day-to-day basis. And that is where my sticking point has been, because we have always kind of talked about Sim being a safe, steady, consistent back the rotation option. And he no longer looks like that type of guy anymore. So this might end up being a moot point with the Joe Ryan injury coming up, but I do want to highlight just how great Connor Prelip has been to start, and how the Twins can hopefully stay on that train and keep him rolling at the major league level.
Yeah, and I will say the thing with Prelip that's kind of makes him a hard evaluation is that we always knew he had the stuff to get big league hitters out. Like his performance on a game to game basis was never in doubt. It's just the fact that he has so rarely been healthy, and he hasn't been able to work, deep into outings really ever in his professional career. And so it is encouraging to see him average a little bit less than 5 innings per start to begin his major league career. I know a lot of the people listening might say, man, he's averaging less than 5 innings per start. That's not great. But last year in AA and AAA, he had 24 appearances and only got to 82 and 2/3 innings. And so for all of last year, he only averaged about 3.5 innings per start. And so he's gradually building up that workload to, acceptable starting pitcher standards. And I think the hope for Prelip is that you could get him up to maybe 110, 120 innings this year, slowly build him into, a real starter. But yeah, on a per inning basis, he's been good. He now has, let me look, a 27% strikeout rate to a 9% walk rate. He's not really keeping the ball on the ground all that much, but as we've seen with guys like Joe Ryan and Bailey Ober and really most of this Twin staff, you can succeed with being a fly ball oriented pitcher. Connor Prelip so far only a 28.6% ground ball rate. He did get closer to league average throughout the minors, so I think that will level out. But yeah, overall encouraging. There's not a ton that we can draw from 3 starts of performance, especially for a guy where we're really just hoping that the workload ticks up, and that's the thing we're looking for. But yeah, overall, really positive so far.
I mean, with the state of the Twins right now, just being on track and being consistently where you're at is definitely something we need to be celebrating. I think my favorite part about Connor Prelip is he's one of those, I would say, rare-ish starting pitchers who does not rely primarily on a fastball offering. He throws his slider at his greatest rate, almost 40%. It's up there with the four-seamer, which is, I think, sitting around 35%. But being a primary off speed guy is always a fun watch as a fan when you're watching a pitcher work. And the numbers have been backing it up. He has a 186 expected batting average on the slider. I think the whiff rate is around 40%. So it's nice to have visual confirmation of what we've seen coming up through the minor leagues. As Matt mentioned, the volume of his pitching has been a bit of a concern. That's why I was pushing really hard for Prelip to start the season in the pen, and I'm quite frankly still not convinced that's where he's headed eventually. But while the Twins can ride this out, it's going to be a really fun watch for sure.
Yeah, currently 40% slider rate, 33% four seamers, 14% changeups, and 10% curveballs. Uh, a lot has been made about his slider. It's super high spin rate. It's really tight. It stays at near 0 for induced vertical break. It's kind of a bullet gyro slider. It doesn't move a whole lot, just kind of drops. It's tight. It's firm. It gets a lot of swing and miss. And I think the thing that I was really excited about is his new curveball. I looked after his first start. I haven't gone back and looked again, but his curveball in his first outing averaged over 3,300 RPMs. So it moves well. He spins it really well, and he's been able to generate a lot of movement with it. And just having another effective breaking ball is going to be big for him, especially because that curveball is a lot slower than his slider. His slider most often sits around that 90 miles per hour, 89, 90. So it's a very firm breaking ball. So being able to drop a curveball in, have a little bit different of a break at around 84 miles an hour is also, a great thing to have.
Yeah, looking at the numbers right here, and the curveball has held up through all 3 starts. The spin rate's down to like 3250, which is right in line. I mean, that's just going to be your game to game variance, but that's certainly, I think, promising because it's something that the Twins have maybe struggled a little bit with a lot of their pitchers in the past. I think they tend to already gravitate towards guys with pretty established complete stuff, and they're focused more on trying to build them up and keep them healthy. And that was certainly the case with Prelip, but it's nice to see the Twins actually get active and involved in not only just getting a pitcher to the major leagues, but building him up to be successful at the major league level and having noticeable positive development for young players when that's something that you've maybe been lacking over the last few years.
Yeah, I'll also say, looking at these young arms coming up, one guy that I've been pleasantly surprised with has been Andrew Morris. All through the minors, he was kind of a pitchability, crafty righty, guy who threw a lot of strikes, knew how to attack hitters, located his stuff in the zone well, but kind of had, vanilla offerings as a whole. And we've seen his stuff tick up pretty considerably, not only this year in the bullpen, but also last year. His velo is up over a mile per hour in AAA. It's jumped a little bit further in the big leagues, and overall, his stuff just looks phenomenal. Not even in short relief, but in 2 or 3 innings at a time. I know I looked last week when we started researching for the pod that never was, and he was leading the Twins team in overall stuff plus. So he has some pretty gross stuff out in that bullpen. He's had a little bit of a rocky start. He's had some rough outings, but I mean, 19% strikeout rate. It's below average, especially for reliever. But I think that could definitely tick up. He's kept the walks in check at an above average 5.8%. And so, he's a guy that I'm really excited to see more of. And I really hope the Twins move him from a long relief role into shorter stints, because we've seen him be really effective 1 or 2 innings at a time, and they try to roll him back out for a third, and it does not go well.
Yeah, he was a guy that initially crossed my mind when we were talking about who could fill into that fifth starter role. But I do think there's guys who are more stretched out that would be a better fit for that role. The big thing with Morris to me is, as you mentioned, you have room for the strikeout rate to tick up, and you would expect that to in a shorter role. But this is also a guy that just straight up has been running into bad luck because he's playing with a bad defense behind him. I mean, there's a lot of red and a lot of things to like on the Savant page. His average exit velo is in the 97th percentile. His chase percentage is way up there, and the big thing is his barrel percentage is in the 92nd percentile as well at 2.6%. So it really is the definition of your crafty outlook, albeit not with your traditional crafty lefty look to it, where he doesn't need to punch a lot of guys out to be an effective reliever. He just needs more competent defense behind him, because guys are going to put the ball in play against Andrew Morris, and it's just not going to be particularly imposing contact. The Twins just need to be ready to actually play clean baseball behind him then.
Yeah. Yeah. Overall, there's not a lot of positives to take away from this team. We've talked about the bullpen kind of as a nebulous group. We've just kind of said the bullpen as a whole has been bad, but even inside of that, a lot of our best relievers so far this year have been waiver claims and are also now hurt. Currently our highest WAR relievers. Well, our highest WAR reliever as a whole is Eric Orzi, who has been good. He was a cheap trade target and has pitched pretty effectively. He has a 280 FIP, but an ERA over 5. So, I mean, the bottom line results haven't been there. But that's Garrett Acton, who has a 32% strikeout rate, has been really solid across the board. He's hurt. Cody Lawyerson, 31% strikeout rate, also has been good across the board. He's hurt. Then we have Morris. Then we have the 1 inning of John Klein. Then we have 2 innings of Luis Garcia in which he has a 27 ERA. That's not great. He's our 4th most effective reliever to start the year. Then we have Cole Sands, who has been looking more like a middle relief guy than the setup or closer that we had hoped. Like he looked in 2024. Topa, who looks bad, a sub 15% strikeout rate with a near 10% walk rate, is never going to get it done for a big league reliever. Even worse than that is Anthony Bonda, who has an ERA of 9. Then we have Zach Kent, who's gone. Cody Funderburk, who somehow has a 208 ERA, but has a 570 FIP. He has more walks than strikeouts, 14% strikeout rate, and an egregious 17.5% walk rate. And that's pretty much all of the Twins relievers. And notice how the only one that you could kind of say has been decent is Eric Orzi, and he has an ERA over 5. That tells you everything you need to know about this group.
If I do have to defend them, which I really don't want to, but feel like I should with how much we've been crapping on them this episode, as we kind of brushed over, there is a lot of injury in here in Cody Lawyerson and Garrett Acton, both being on the IL for a while now, on top of Cole Sands just recently going on the injured list. Not saying that these guys would be difference makers, but when you're looking at who has been successful out of the pen to start the year, you're right. Cody Lawyerson did at least look competent before he got hurt. Garrett Acton looked competent before he got hurt. These are guys we would not be expecting to be the producers of the bullpen, but by the numbers they really have been. They just haven't gotten the chance to actually pitch in our bullpen this season. So, as with any pitching staff, when you're less injured, it's going to be better. Not saying that will even make it good, but there is some reason to look at this bullpen and say, okay, even for as bad as we were expecting them to be, it is a lot worse than we expected, because why is Luis Garcia pitching in our bullpen? Like, that just never should have happened in the first place.
Throwing the eighth inning of a 1-run game, not only in the bullpen, pitching leverage spots in the bullpen. And then I'll also say, like, it says something about the group as a whole that we're saying, well, with better injury luck, we'd probably be better. But like the only guys who've been injured is really Acton and Lawyerson. And Lawyerson got DFA'd by the Twins and then was on the Angels 40 man for most of the offseason, got released, not even waived. Like they didn't want him. They just cut him. Became a free agent. Twins signed him to a minor league deal during camp, and then he made the roster. Like he was truly replacement level. Like he was available for absolutely nothing. And Garrett Acton they picked up in a very minor trade. And even looping in Eric Orsi, the Twins traded pretty much nothing of significance to get him. So these are three true scrap heap guys. And while they've pitched better than the rest of this Twins bullpen, it's not to say that they're good relievers or that they're guys that we can count on. It's just that they haven't completely sucked in the limited opportunity they've been given. And that's a big win for a truly abysmal group.
Yeah, I think the tough part to me, because I was just looking more into, like, why is Luis Garcia throwing in our bullpen when we have a guy like Kendry Rojas who came up a few weeks ago, looked decent, has a lot more potential behind him. And I think that's maybe where these injuries start to hurt the bullpen more, not in the sense that, we're missing guys that we expected to produce, but in part, you would like to see Kendry Rojas come up instead of Luis Garcia. But when you already have three lefties in the bullpen, you really cannot afford to add a fourth. And you would look at it and say, okay, why don't we just cut Anthony Banda then, who we talked about a lot when Prelip and Rojas were coming up as being completely ineffective and not really worth the roster spot he was given. But when you have this many injuries, you can't afford to cut bait with a guy like Anthony Banda so quick, because you never know when you might actually end up needing him back. So it's tough, because I don't want to give, I would say, ownership or this front office any credit, but even us as fans were looking at the layout for the season under the assumption that, yeah, we don't have a great bullpen on paper, but David Festa and or Zebby Matthews, at least one of our starting prospects, was probably going to end up in the bullpen to help beef it up. And we had guys who were just injured to start the year. Like, we still haven't seen Travis Adams, who, while not great, would be an upgrade. It has been tough because the Twins not only did not have a great bullpen to start, but they did not have room for so many injuries to pile up, and that really took away a lot of their flexibility in working with these younger guys.
Yeah, but I would argue that Andrew Morris is definitely a starting pitching prospect. They moved him to the bullpen. John Klein is kind of a tweener and kind of the Travis Adams way, where it's not necessarily moving a starter to the bullpen. Kind of the same thing with Kendry Rojas. They definitely are hoping he's still a starter long term, but like Andrew Morris is definitely a starting pitcher that they've moved into the bullpen to try to reinforce this group. Maybe we would have seen another one if we had Festa or Pablo healthy. I think that's definitely reasonable. But to your point about not being able to fit another lefty in this group, that was always an issue. I mean, we talked about it throughout the offseason, how having not one, not two, but three ineffective lefties on this roster made no sense. Like it sometimes can make sense to have three left-handed relievers in a bullpen, but at least one of them has to be, very good lefty who can get righties out as well. And that's not true of any of these three. Funderburk has been an absolute train wreck. Anthony Bonda, his fastball velocity is down like 3 miles an hour. He's not missing bats. And he himself was DFA'd by the Dodgers this offseason, which allowed the Twins to get him in the first place. And the Twins' highest paid reliever, Taylor Rogers, making $2 million, has a 13.7% strikeout rate against an 11.8% walk rate. And the Twins have such little confidence in Taylor Rogers as any sort of leverage arm that they stretched him out for 2 1/3 innings today. Yeah, Taylor Rogers hasn't thrown into a third inning of work in a game, I would imagine, since he broke into the majors as like a long reliever in like, what was that, 2015?
I want to cue our listeners in here on to just how much of a train wreck the Cody Funderburk experiment has been this year. I mean, it's not really an experiment, but because you look under the hood and you're like, oh, a 2-something ERA, this guy, like, he can't be doing that bad, right? And then you look at his ERA plus and it's over 200, and you're like, what do you mean? He's been great. He's been one of the few guys not allowing runs. And then you look at the real numbers. He is walking hitters not only at a rate higher than he's allowing hits, but at a rate higher than he is striking out hitters. He may be the first reliever I've ever seen with a strikeout to walk ratio sub 1. It really is baffling how he's been able to hang on this long. And if you actually watch the games, this would all back it up. I don't know that I've ever seen Cody Funderburk pitch a clean inning so far this year, but it's fun because it's almost like a speculative bubble. Like, you're watching this and you know something very bad is going to happen. You just aren't quite sure when. You're just kind of watching. It's more of like a thriller suspense type of movie.
I've never, I'll expand it past Cody Funderburk. I've never seen a bullpen who is worse at getting strikeouts, especially relative to their number of walks issued. I mean, this group as a whole has no bat missing ability. Let me just look at this. Like, our top, I mean, if you take out Acton and Lawyerson, because they've only thrown 6 innings apiece, our top 4 strikeout rate pitchers are all starters. Then we have Cole Sands at a below league average rate of 22%. Then Orzi, Bonda. Well, I mean, only Sands and Orzi are above a 20% strikeout rate, which is absurd. And then you have the Bonda, Morris, Ober, Topa group that's in the like 15 to 20%, which is absolutely atrocious for a reliever, by the way. That's so bad. That's bad. That's really bad for a starting pitcher. As a reliever, it's unplayable. And then Funderburk and Rogers at like 13.5, 14%. Atrocious. We haven't even talked about the worst pitcher on this Twins roster. And I mean, you touched on him earlier, but Simeon Woods Richardson, through 7 starts, 35 innings, he has a 10.6% strikeout rate. Truly hard to describe how god awful a 10.7% strikeout rate is. And he's walking guys at like a 9% clip. And you look at his under the hood numbers, like his whiff rate's not good. He doesn't get chases. He doesn't get even called strikes, which is kind of fluky. He's just bad. And he also doesn't limit hard contact. He doesn't get ground balls. He has a 6.5 ERA. He has a 6.47 FIP. And it's not even like he's getting unlucky with home runs. He has a 5.85 xFIP. I truly, like, a lot of these stats aren't predictive. They're descriptive. They're saying what happened, not what's going to happen. But even, if I look into his profile, let's see what the models think he's going to do rest of the season. I think my go-to model for projecting pitchers has a kind of a funny name. It's called Oopsie on Fangraphs. They project him to average a little over 5 innings a start the rest of the way. Okay, not bad. 4.93 ERA. Woof. And you look at the other models, they're all in the 4.6 to 5.3 range. Like, this is not even a capable 5th starter. And he might have looked like that for the last couple seasons. It does not look like that's going to be happening again.
And yet, I would put a lot of good money on if he stays healthy, Simeon Woods Richardson getting to 30 starts this year, just because he kind of has to. And this is, I think, the biggest flaw in the Twins' plans this offseason to be competitive is they just did not give themselves enough outs for guys not performing at the level you would have thought. They in a lot of places had the chance and still have the upside to come in and improve the team with young players, but there's still just too many holes in too many major key areas where they just kind of, I think, took some guys for granted in their performance, and now that's where we're really seeing the destruction of their decisions from the offseason.
Yeah, it's just bad, and I don't necessarily think that Sim is going to stick around as a starting pitcher. Like I think they could move him into a long relief role, especially if they try to get guys like Andrew Morris or John Klein into shorter stints. Maybe they have some more health from like Zebi and Festa, and Kendry Rojas can get stretched out to 4 or 5 innings. They just promoted Ryan Gallagher, another one of their starting pitching prospects up to AAA. Maybe he becomes ready at some point. Like, there's still a chance that they develop more options to go into the starting rotation, and they just stick Sim in a long relief role, kind of as the mop up guy, and see if he can find it again. I mean, they're certainly not in a position to just DFA him and just lose him because they need the depth, they need the arm. But God, there's nothing to like in his profile currently.
So I think we've both been under the assumption that when David Festa does get healthy, that the Twins were already pushing him towards the bullpen, and that's where he would end up. Are we still on the same page? Because I think we just as easily could see them try to stretch him back out as a starter again when he does get healthy, and I would not be at all opposed to that at this point, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, especially if this team, well, I don't expect Festa to be ready for probably another month at this point. And it's probably unlikely that this team will still be competitive a month from now. And so as Festa builds back up, I think it's entirely reasonable for this team to say, yeah, I mean, we could use bullpen help, but also it doesn't really matter because we're going to be bad regardless. Let's see if this guy can be a starter. Um, yeah, so I definitely could see that. And also, yeah, we have some hope for guys like Prelip and Rojas being starting options. But like, even if Prelip sticks in the rotation, he's not going to make 25 starts this year. Like, he just doesn't have the workload built up to be able to do that. He's probably going to be capped at around 120 innings this year, and he's already up to I think like 30 innings. And so they're going to need other arms, and they might just see what Festa can do as a starter again.
Does he get the Steven Strasburg treatment, Connor Prelep, then, and the idea that like once he hits his inning cap for the year, they just shut him down, or how do we see that playing out? Because I don't disagree that there needs to be an innings cap there, but we're talking about the lack of depth in this entire staff. They also can't necessarily afford to just hit the middle of July and be like, all right, we'll see you next year, Connor Prelep. Like they need some sort of production out of him almost all year is what I would say.
Yeah, but that's assuming this year matters at all for the Twins. I mean, if we get to July and they're around 500, they probably get more aggressive with Prelip and his usage and try to push him back past where they normally would, building up a starter. But like, I mean, at this point, it's trending towards August and September just not mattering at all for this team. At which point, you can pretty confidently just shut him down and say, all right, well, we'll keep building you up next year, or at least option him to the minors and have him throw, an inning or two at a time and give him a few weeks to reset and then come back to the big leagues. We've seen teams do that before where they will kind of give a guy like a month off and then bring him back up. But yeah, I mean, there's, I think, very little chance of Prelip going to 150 innings this year. Like that would be such a big jump from what he's done ever in his life, but especially since high school. Yeah, he threw like I want to say like 10 or 12 innings in all of college. He threw 6.2 innings in 2023. He threw 23 and a third in 2024. Last year, they jumped him up to 82 and two thirds. I feel like 120, 125 is like his cap.
I guess you also have the argument that by the end of July, the start of August, you're hoping that some of these guys that haven't been able to produce at the start of the season are ready and raring to go. Obviously, you hope that Zebby Matthews gets on track. You talked about Ryan Gallagher coming up. So I guess it should be easier in those dog days of the summer, the last few months of the season, to find more help for the Twins to fill out their starts for the rest of the year. But it'll certainly be interesting to see the messaging from the Twins on that because, I mean, obviously, this early into the season, you really don't even bother addressing or thinking about it, but you have to imagine internally they've already got a number.
Yeah. Also, I mean, by the time you're bad enough to where you don't care about shutting a guy down, you're willing to take a decrease in performance. Like, it doesn't matter who your guy is. Like, every team has guys who are generally capable of giving 4 or 5 innings and just eating it on the mound. They just probably won't be good in those 4 or 5 innings. And if you're a bad team, it like truly doesn't matter. Like, they could throw Trent Baker out there. They could throw Travis Adams for 4 innings. Be like, it's probably going to suck, but he can do it. They could throw Corey Lewis out there. They could throw CJ Culpepper. Like, they could take any upper minor's arm, throw him on the 40 man, stick him on the mound, and they'll go 4 innings and probably give up 4 or 5 runs. And if you're already bad, it's like, well, who really cares?
How lively do we think Kyle Gibson's arm is still? Maybe
He's probably around.
Call up Phil Hughes, Carl Pavano, Francisco Liriano.
I mean, Kyle Gibson was still pitching last year.
That is true. He could legitimately be a guy that the Twins end up bringing in, or somebody of that ilk. But
yeah, see if Rich Hill will come out of retirement.
Absolutely. At this point, like it's like we said at the start of the season, I'm already coming back to the mindset where we're not going to be good, so let's have some fun with it. I'm sure there's plenty of fun names that the Twins could probably coax out of retirement or on to the roster for a month or two, even if they're not good and they're just trying to showcase what they still have left in the tank for an MLB team. There's plenty of ways to keep things interesting through that really slog through the back end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, also, there's always waiver claims, there's always minor trades. Like, you can find guys who can pitch. It's just finding guys who can pitch and be effective. And at the point where you're not a good team, the second half of that just doesn't matter at all.
The upside to how many fringe players the Twins have on their roster is they could do something at the deadline that we really don't see in the MLB, certainly not that we do at the level of like the NBA. They could just be a dumping ground. There could be a trade where the Twins are offloading pieces. Let's say, just for example, the Twins are sending Ryan Jeffers to the Mets. I understand the Mets are not in buying mode right now, and Francisco Alvarez has looked good this year, but that was something we talked about a lot this offseason where, yeah, maybe the Twins, on top of taking back a bunch of prospects, do also take back like David Peterson or somebody that the Mets themselves would like to DFA and probably would post trade deadline. It's something, I guess. It's another way for the Twins to add value, and I think if they're willing to take on enough negative contracts at the deadline to round out the year, that they could get a serious production from that, but B, a little bit more prospect value for sure.
Yeah, but I think trades like that are generally like easier to find in the off season because by the time you get to the middle of the year, like that money's generally spent already. You don't necessarily want to pick up guys who are under contract for the following season, so you're probably just looking at rentals. By the time we're at the deadline, probably 60% of that guy's salary has already been paid. And also, there's not a good way for that team to reallocate the salary elsewhere. So I think teams are less willing to give up more prospect value just to like eat a contract unless they're a small market team that's truly up against their, you know, self-imposed salary limits, in which case they might just have to do a deal like that to get to be able to acquire upgrades at the deadline. But yeah, I mean, the Twins also don't have any willingness to spend money. Like they didn't spend $5 million on a half decent reliever, so it's hard to expect that they're going to be willing to take other teams' bad contracts.
Nah, the idea is definitely that if you're trading pieces at the deadline, like you flip Ryan Jeffers, that means you have $3-4 million that you can take back on and still be a cash neutral deal. It wouldn't add anything fun or exciting, and like you said, that probably wouldn't lead to actually any more prospect value increase. But it'd be really funny if, again, say the Twins go out and pick up Sean Manaea for the last 2 months of the season because the Mets are already about to DFA him, and we can just jump the line and grab him. I That's what I'm looking forward to at this point if we are selling at the deadline.
Yeah, I mean, sure, but like we saw this last year too. I mean, the Twins dumped like $30 million in payroll at the deadline, picked up no major league salary in return. Like it revolves around being able to convince your owner that it's worth taking on salary to get this slightly better player that you won't see for a couple years, and that's a really hard thing to pitch to an ownership group, especially one as money conscious as the poll ads. It's hard to be like, hey, this is a better baseball trade when all that they're going to hear is we're going to spend $5 million in a year that doesn't matter.
Well, not exactly a fun way to be able to end our podcast this week, but I would be lying to you if I said I was expecting anything more. It certainly gets tough when we're already this bad to have that energy to come out here and keep rehashing this Twins team over and over week to week when the results aren't changing. But we do because that's the type of baseball sickos we are. That's why we started this podcast. That's why we're here. And certainly, if you're listening, I'm sure you guys are just as passionate about this team. So we appreciate everybody who has stuck around for this podcast episode. And hopefully, as we go along, we'll have something better to talk about. Till then, as always, you can find us on Twitter at the Matt and Eric Talk Twins podcast. We're also both active individually on Twitter. You'll catch a lot more of our game to game daily thoughts on the Twins there. So if you want more content, make sure to give us a follow. Otherwise, you'll find us wherever you get your podcast: Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, Amazon, all that great jazz. Until next week, thank